Designing the future. What I want to talk about is really this is partly my own personal opinion, obviously my impressions, shall I say, about what's happening in Christchurch at the moment, about where buildings are going. I'm an architect, so I'm going to concentrate in particular on architecture and where I think our future building stock and what it's going to look like, what our city is going to look like. I start with this statement: architecture is a reflection of society, because I believe that architecture, culture, society are totally interwoven, and I think the two you can't really extricate, as I'll explain as I go through. But I thought I'd extend that to this statement: great architecture is a reflection of the best aspirations of society and culture. And I think as we move forward with the rebuild, I think we've got to, it'd be great to think that what we build is the very best possible, but also that very best possible reflects the hopes and aspirations of the people of Christchurch, people of Canterbury, people of New Zealand, rather than perhaps some international. Okay, I thought, talking about the future, it's always good to look at where you've come from before you look at the future. So just a very brief remembrance of old Christchurch. I've now called it pre-earthquake Christchurch, essentially. It's traditionally thought of that there were two high points in Christchurch architecture. Talk to most architectural historians and they'll say one of the real high points was the Gothic revival. This is a European post-European settlement I'm talking about for a moment. I'll touch back on Indigenous architecture as well later. But certainly the Gothic revival style, I love these pictures, particularly the one at the top left, which is the start of the construction of the Provincial Chambers. You can imagine the first forefathers, pioneers coming into what is essentially, as you see, tussock, swampy, silty ground, and building this quite amazing structure in the middle. But what I want to point out, particularly the bottom picture, the old stone chamber of the Provincial Chambers, is that it's made to look everlasting. It's made out of stone, it's heavy, you can see the base flares out, small windows. It's designed, it's a symbol of settlement, it's a symbol of permanence. It's saying we're going to be here forever, and this is the sort of building to heavy, strong, apparently strong buildings sitting on this land, and imported style from overseas. And of course that followed through in some of the most magnificent buildings of Christchurch. Bit of a sad set of pictures these. So by that it's once again a reflection of society. You think of the Egyptians building the pyramids, Rome building their big stone cities. It's really that type of thinking. Christchurch Modern, this is the second high point, perhaps not quite as universally liked it by some as the first, but still a very strong high point in Christchurch architecture, sometimes called brutalism, which is an unfortunate term, but Christchurch Modern is another term that's used. Christchurch Town Hall, even though it's more contemporary, obviously in the Gothic revival, it's the same thinking. It's instead of stone and brick, it's concrete and aggregate concrete, and they use concrete block as well. So it's still this heavy, massive building built to last, the symbol of that we're building for the future, a legacy that's going to last as we go. It looks physically, apparently looks like it's very strong. The other one, Peter Bevan's building, tunnel building, another example of that type of style. Marvellous building. Of course, we all know that's what happened to these buildings. They were not really, in hindsight, appropriate to building in a swamp, essentially a swamp, in a shaky, earthquake-prone zone. The people who built these didn't understand the forces as we do now, that these heavy stone buildings are not really what we appropriate, sadly. So where are we going? What I think with the earthquake has given us a chance to have a paradigm shift, a whole rethink of how we build in Christchurch. And I think essentially we're looking at more or less the opposite of those traditional buildings that we all loved. And I think it's now that bottom word there, lightweight, where before buildings were apparently heavy and physically heavy to give this sense of eternity, building for forever. I think now we have to build lightweight buildings. Lightweight buildings would tend to be flexible. I've put a whole lot of words here, nimble. Also, they tend to be more open, transparent and democratic. Stone masonry buildings, by their nature, generally have small windows. You can't see in too well because you need the solid walls to hold these buildings up. So I thought I'd just put this rather silly image in of the difference between strength and weight. Obviously on the left, this massive weightlifter, which is sort of the way old Christchurch used to think. You know, we build the strength and weight into our buildings. I think we now have to move in the future of Christchurch architecture more towards the ballerina principle, touching the earth lightly, nimble, flexible, with to absorb the forces of nature. Ballerinas, of course, are strong in their own right, but it's strength in a different way, strength through flexibility and those things. So I'd like to think we're moving in that direction. Briefly show you a couple of buildings we're working on as an example of that within the 4 Avs. One is this building, the only building going up at the moment, right in the heart of the red zone cordon. This is a replacement for the Strangers building, corner of Manchester High, Litchfield. As you can see there, steel frame on the outside, lots of glass, very lightweight, touches the earth lightly. Steel can sort of bend and twist and spring back into shape. It looks, a few people have said to me, it doesn't look very strong. This building is close to 200% of the earthquake code. It's IL4. It's the same thing you build emergency departments and hospitals and civil defence. Because glass can be designed to move in gaskets, steel can flex. There's a lot of vertical, you might see this vertical, doesn't show up wonderfully well, but vertical glass fins for sunscreening, putting colour in there, coloured glass. In the past, the vertical sunscreening would have been done in concrete, probably sort of big concrete buildings. I don't think we'd do that anymore. The real building, main building I want to look at is this one you might have seen going up in Victoria Street. A 3-storey building, offices, top 2 stories, retail at the bottom. This is LVL framed timber multi-storey building, the first really of this particular type in the country, if not the world. There's been a few other buildings built using this technology in Nelson and Wellington. This is pushing it a little bit further again, as I'll explain. But using timber instead of concrete and steel for your structure means that it's a lot lighter. It's probably about a quarter of the weight of a concrete equivalent. So you don't need to spend as much on foundations. You know, it's liquefiable ground. The ballerina principle, touching the earth lightly. This is it literally a few days ago, looking across the wasteland at it, so it's underway. This is a shot inside. It's got a marvellous, I think, a very unique feel. We're going to expose these beams and columns. This warmth inside, very different to a steel and concrete building. It's just a spec office building. This will be just fitted out with desks and chairs. So this is a picture of the column beam connection. It's fascinating technology, post-tension. That steel end cap you can see there is the end of a cable that runs horizontally through the beam, and essentially like a big spring or tensioned up cable, it holds the building in place. The building can flex a little bit, but the cables pull it back into shape. So where a concrete building, as we've all sadly seen, gets damaged, it ends up on a lean, it's uneconomic to repair, it's demolished. This can go through a major earthquake and be easily repairable, and you can move in pretty quickly after the event. So this has been developed, this technology has been developed at Canterbury University. Andy Buchanan, Stefano Pamplin and others have developed this. It's a world first technology. Nowhere else in the world are they doing this sort of thing with LVL and timber. It's radiata pine, so it's grown right here in the South Island. It's LVL, they laminate it together to make an engineered timber, very strong, very good for these sort of buildings. Done in Nelson, the LVL's made in Nelson, there's a plant up there. Fabricated here, it's timber as a carbon capture rather than carbon emitter. It's a good news story at all sorts of levels you can imagine, and it's absolutely appropriate for building in a shaky place with liquefiable soils. It's we think this is one of the futures really of Christchurch. That's the principle. Hopefully it won't collapse totally like that giraffe. But we all know the little collapsing toys that you push down the base and you let go of the base, they all spring back into shape. It's exactly the same principle. There's these cables that run through it, through the building, that pull it back into shape. So it's interesting. We had a, you might have seen in the paper, Ty Farrow, a very prominent Canadian architect, visited New Zealand, brought over by New Zealand Wood to tell us about timber technology from Canada. He got here, had a look at what's happening here, including this building, and he said, well, why don't you bring me over? You guys should be going over to tell me, because you guys are actually more advanced in timber technologies than we are in Canada. Same thing, we had one of the leading engineering firms in the world come over from Australia to visit this building, and he was flabbergasted. He said, Christchurch is so far ahead of what Australia and other countries are doing in the world in terms of this timber technology. So I really think we've got something that should be pushed here. That's a photo from just literally the other day. So it's still under construction. It's got to have glass. The timber has to be protected from the weather, probably for obvious reasons. So it's going to have a glass exterior. Glasses, we can make it so you can see the timber. We don't want to hide it, and have sun screening on the outside. But I look at this slide with this timber, the fact that it's a whole lot of like ribs that run back, very axial, and I think, well, hold on, we've done this architecture, this type of concept and architecture before in Christchurch. Of course, pre-European architecture does exactly this. It's timber buildings with the whole series of ribs going back. I'd like to think we can, with this sort of technology, we can start to relate it back to the architecture, which is, I think in hindsight, is a more sensible way to build. These timber structures which can flex and move in our shaky aisles, rather than these massive masonry buildings that unfortunately haven't fared very well. So I'm going to go back to that statement that I started with, that great architecture is a reflection of the best aspirations of society. And I think with these buildings being lightweight, more open and transparent buildings, that I think is going to be the future of Christchurch, I'm sure is going to be the future of Christchurch, that I think that sort of building also reflects the sort of values that our society wants to be too. So I've tried to just put a whole lot of words here. This lightweight world, I think, was open, transparent and democratic, like I think we'd all like to be, I'm sure. Flexible, resilient, these buildings are very flexible, resilient, adaptable, forward-thinking, innovative, creative. I mean, the innovation in this technology is amazing. Sustainable, lightweight means less material for more. Using less material for more has got to be sustainable. And of course, as I've just touched on at the end, integrate the values of tangata whenua. And I would like to think we're already, in a way, doing a lot of this. We're making progress. Gap Filler, Lux City, Restart Mall, Cardboard Cathedral, Art Box. It's all starting. The seeds are all there. I think there's a real theme starting to emerge, and it's an extremely exciting time to be part of Christchurch. Thank you.